If you would prefer to have your camera off, that's perfectly fine, although I love seeing some faces for reactions and for opinions. That's wonderful. If I just asked you to unmute, I did not mean to do that. I apologize, and don't worry about it. You're like, what does she want me to say? I'm not sure. I apologize for that. Well, let me get in the chat here some resources for everyone. Alrighty, and while we're doing this, just so we can get to know each other a little bit and have a little conversation before we get going, we will be making use of the chat function and the basics of Zoom. So if you've done Zoom before, as I'm sure many, if not all of you have, you know how this goes. But in the chat, only if you want to, let's get a little discussion going. I think last time I asked what everybody's favorite podcast was or favorite show. Let's say this time, what's your favorite documentary or true story or nonfiction that you read? So if you want to start that in the chat, I'll put mine in just a moment. And here in the chat, you'll see a participation guide for today. This will be yours to follow along to kind of see all of what we're saying summed up a little bit. And Laura, I can see anything about true crime. I am the same way. My YouTube suggestions have a lot of, let's just say, interesting suggestions. I can just say that. My favorite documentary, I'll put it in the chat. It's got a great title. It's called Shut Up, Little Man. And it's about these two young guys in the late 1980s in San Francisco who recorded their neighbors without their neighbors' knowledge. So problem one, right? And then they decided to share their recordings via cassette tape. So it went viral before the internet. So the entire documentary is how things went viral on the underground, if you will. Before the internet and the impact it has on others when we use them for content without their knowledge. Ooh, 10 Feet from Fame. I've heard of that one. That one is highly recommended. And again, in the chat here for folks just coming in, we're talking about our favorite documentaries, but I've also dropped our guide for today. So this will be yours again to take with you to use to sum up the information we cover and then put it into action. Really what I'd like everybody to take away from today is building what I call a resource bank. You may refer to it as something else, a resource library, a resource hub, but basically somewhere you can go or that your students can go and nobody really has to ask too many questions or think too hard. All the resources are there and they are organized. So we'll have some instructions on how to do that. And I'm also going to include, if you'll give me just a moment, today's PowerPoint as well. We do have some shareable resources in that PowerPoint. There's also a video in the PowerPoint which shares additional resources. And since I was not able to download the file from that to share those resources, I want you to have access to those as well. Give me just one moment here. Okay, somebody talking about changing up their diet a bit after watching documentaries. I've done that as well. I was also one of those people, and yes, please make fun of me, who immediately after watching Super Size Me back in the day went to McDonald's. So that had the opposite of the intended effect on me. So I can go ahead and say that. Now let me go ahead and share the presentation. And again, if you're just coming in, totally fine. Please feel free to either have your camera on or off. And if you would like to participate, just keep in mind that this is going to be recorded, or this is currently being recorded. All right, let me try to get this into the actual slideshow mode. Please. There we are. Does this look correct to everyone? A nod, a smile. Okay. Awesome. Just check a couple things here. Oh, the Last of Us companion podcast, fantastic. Um, I have not yet started The Last of Us. I've just been consuming a lot of media around it because it's everything that I want in a show. So I can't wait to start watching that one. Alrighty, so looks like we can go ahead and get started. Doing my little let's get started dance while we're all in here. Okay, wonderful. Hello again, everybody. My name is Anne Grybowski, pronouns she, her, hers, and I am your host today for our presentation about financial aid, but more than financial aid, non-monetary resources. And so what do we mean by non-monetary resources? These are things that the student needs to attend school, to be a person, to be a healthy person, above and beyond the dollars and cents that the financial aid office may offer. I am here to tell you that I am still very pro financial aid. So we have a component in here about how to get the most out of your financial aid experience, but we're really going to focus on how to help the student beyond paying that tuition bill, because sometimes, that can be on the priority list, but maybe not the tip top of the priority list. So we'll go through that. If you've heard me present before, you've heard me say this, I enjoy being interrupted because I find that's where the discussions come from. I like getting stumped on questions because then I get to go do hours of research and respond back to you. So please feel free to interrupt me, ask questions, talk to each other in the chat. We want this to be a learning experience, but also sort of a get to know you for folks to learn about the resources around them. I did mention that this is going to be recorded. We do have a YouTube channel. ASAOE has a YouTube channel, so you should all go ahead and subscribe to that. But we will post this on the YouTube channel in a couple days, in a day or so, so it'll be able to view and share and things like that. So you'll be able to get the recording from there. So what are we going to cover today? I did mention that we are going to talk about financial aid, and that means the FAFSA and the CSS profile. If you've not heard of either of those, or you've only heard of one or the other, the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. So that's the government's general aid application to access funds from the Department of Education. The CSS profile is the College Board, if you're familiar with College Board, is their version of the FAFSA, but it's a bit more in depth. So it doesn't look just at the surface information. It looks at some of the, oh, but wait, and oh, wait, I couldn't report that, but this is my situation. The CSS profile is a little more in depth. However, one of the other major differences is that the FAFSA is accepted at most, if not all, schools in the US. The CSS profile is not. So just as an aside, if you're working with a student and you don't know if you need to get just the FAFSA or a FAFSA and a CSS profile ready, on College Board's website, they have a list of all the schools that accept the CSS profile. But we'll talk about how to maybe get a little more funding from those two different forms, those two different sources. We'll talk about understanding need, and I know a lot of us know what need is or what need means to us or our students, but we're going to go for sort of a more holistic approach, because when we say need from an aid perspective, it usually means how much more money is required to pay the bill. Somebody asked, why would a student need to do the CSS profile if you are already doing the FAFSA? That's a fantastic question. Some schools, again, not all, because some schools will not even accept CSS profile, but some schools use FAFSA for the federal aid, your Pell Grant, and things like that. Other schools will use the CSS profile to unlock institutional aid. So certain centralized scholarship pools, things that are based within academic areas that are academic adjacent, but are not federal aid funds. That sort of makes sense? And if not, please let me know. And yes, as Robert mentioned, some schools actually require CSS. To that point, some schools say we require the FAFSA, we require the CSS. Often that means we really, really, really suggest, even though it says require, sometimes it's a suggest. And I point that out because some folks may not be eligible to complete a FAFSA or a CSS profile, but that does not mean they are not able to then go to school. So just want to make that distinction. So after understanding need, we'll talk about the different levels of resources available to folks and where to look for what and what might be available. We'll touch briefly on rental assistance and what's available, but more importantly, how to access that assistance and where to look depending on where you are in the US. And then we'll wrap up with some Q&A, some discussion, and some info swapping, because I know right here we have a wonderful trove of knowledge of folks who probably know these wonderful resources that I don't know about yet. So we'll have some time to sort of swap information there as well. And again, this is me. If you've not seen me, heard me yet, my name is Anne Grybowski. I have been presenting for ever for one thing or another. Before I even started in the Office of Student Aid there in 2013, I worked for Hershey Foods. I was one of their actors. So I do a lot of talking, and most of that talking has been around federal financial aid, student need, and meeting student need. So that's where my background and my knowledge in this area is coming from. I was the Office of Student Aid at Penn State's outreach coordinator for a number of years, and through then I learned about all of these different things available to students and how we can kind of organize that so we know where to direct our students. So again, we have to talk about FAFSA, right? Since I'm a FAFSA person, a student aid person at heart, I need to start here. And if anybody heard a weird noise a couple nights ago, that was probably my husband groaning at this joke from New Mexico, because, oh my goodness, he was like, "You're really going to include that in your presentation?" Of course I am. Of course I am. So FAFSA, we do recommend that students fill it out if they can, but we also recommend that students who are filling out the FAFSA consider what they were not able to report. So what do I mean by that? We filled out our FAFSA. We know the information that we have there is complete, but what didn't they ask us about that's relevant? So we know perhaps maybe a couple months ago, we had a large fire in our home, and that caused us a lot of damage and a lot of things that we had to pay for unexpectedly. FAFSA didn't ask about that. FAFSA didn't consider that. I had no way to report that. And that's somewhat of an extreme example, but I bring that up because FAFSA is working to generate an awarding index. It used to be called the EFC, or Expected Family Contribution. It's now known as the SAI, or Student Aid Index. Those two things are interchangeable. So if you hear EFC, SAI, same idea. But basically with the FAFSA, you're generating an awarding index number so the government knows how much money to give you. So if you're not reporting all of the information you possibly can, or more realistically, if FAFSA is not does not have the fields for you to report the information you'd like to, you might not be awarded to your fullest potential. The EFC or the SAI may not actually reflect the real level of need. And that's when we begin a process known as professional judgment. Professional judgment has a lot of nicknames: Pro J, Prof J, PJ. Same deal. Professional judgment is a university's ability to say, okay, I see what's going on the FAFSA. I see what's going on the CSS profile. I disagree. There is more than what is entered here, or what is entered here is not a complete or fully honest depiction of the student situation. So depending on which documents you filed, both the FAFSA and the CSS profile have different rules and considerations for things they can go back to or look at a second time under the heading of professional judgment. So another way of saying that is both have certain things that qualify and don't qualify for additional aid awarding. It's saying that the presentation's a little blurry. I apologize for that. That may be my connection, so we'll try to work through it. And if that's not possible, please feel free to follow along in the file I sent. I do apologize for that. So back to the FAFSA and the CSS profile. FAFSA allows certain things to be considered above and beyond what's reported in our information. So the process is formally known as a SCEF. So a SCEF, again, is a special circumstance evaluation form. It is a way for a student to report additional information to a school that the FAFSA didn't know about or that happened after the FAFSA's reported data. FAFSA uses what we call prior year data, really creative name, right? So prior year data is data from 2 years ago. And a lot can happen in 2 years. So maybe, unfortunately, a student lost a parent. There's been a dramatic change in income, especially around when COVID-19 hit. We saw a lot of that. A catastrophe, as I mentioned earlier. All of these are things that you can go to the student aid office, mention, and see if you can get an adjustment to your EFC or SAI. The CSS profile also has a professional judgment component. They can actually look into a little bit more, and if you're curious whether or not your situation or your student's situation qualifies for CSS profile professional judgment, I've actually linked their website. They have a wonderful component to their website on College Board there that breaks down, okay, here's my situation. Can I do anything about it? And if I can, where do I go to get the form? I was messing around with it the other day just to see, you know, which dead ends I would hit and where it would take me. And that is really a font of information. So if you are working with students with a CSS profile, please go ahead and use that, because that's going to be very helpful. Again, schools can do professional judgment, but the key word there is judgment. Schools can choose to say, I understand you have a change in circumstance, but we are not conducting professional judgment, or we hear what your situation was. We do not consider it to be professional or reviewable. So it doesn't hurt to ask. So definitely something I would recommend considering. Do we have any questions? Okie doke. A little somebody I'd like to introduce you to. Let me just take a sip of water here. Excuse me. A dear friend and coworker of mine who some of you may know. Amanda Carl is somebody that I used to work with in the Office of Student Aid. She worked on my team, but she was part of our what we referred to as the Academic College Initiative. And what they did is they were housed in the financial aid office, but they had individuals in respective academic colleges that would work as specific liaisons for those students. So looking out for additional aid sources, if that student was slipping in their grades or in their aid eligibility, seeing if we could provide additional assistance, all that kind of good stuff. She is one of the most passionate student advocates I've ever met. And she was not able to join us today, but she was so kind as to record a little bit of a blurb for us on her take and her feelings behind need. So before working in the Office of Student Aid, she's also worked in the healthcare field in mental health. So in addition to understanding students from a financial standpoint, she understands them from a health standpoint as well.
Hi,
Sorry, got that started a little earlier than I meant to. So she's going to go ahead and tell us about what need really means to our students. And if you are unable to hear her, please let me know.
Amanda Carl. I'm really excited to be here today with you to talk about the importance of student well-being and how to help those students meet their needs. We'll focus on 3 areas of student well-being, not to say that there aren't more than 3 areas, but these are the 3 areas that are probably the most relevant to students today. We'll also talk about some resources for those students and how to help them meet those needs and point them in the right direction. Students cannot perform at their highest level if their basic physical needs are not being met, such as food, clothing, shelter, and medical care. Maslow's hierarchy of needs identifies these physical necessities as the foundation of the pyramid where growth is achieved from. When students appear to be struggling in one or more of these areas, we should be exploring and asking questions to learn if the outward-facing issues are masking a physical need. As for resources, in the United States, the Health Resources and Services Administration's programs provide equitable health care to people who are geographically isolated and economically or medically vulnerable. A list of healthcare centers is available on their website. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services also offers educational information regarding food and nutrition, physical activity, and health literacy. As for Pennsylvania residents, the PA Department of Human Services offers information on resources and programming throughout the state of Pennsylvania. For Penn State students, they can have their physical needs met through a variety of different options. For medical needs, University Health Services offers medical care for students. As for physical well-being overall, campus recreation is a great option as well. Currently enrolled full-time students at University Park automatically have access on their student ID cards to the intramural building, the Hepper Fitness Center, and more. Even at Commonwealth campuses, Penn State Brandywine's Fitness Center is available to all students, as well as staff and faculty with a Penn State ID. If you go to the studentaffairs.psu.edu/campusrec website, as listed on this slide, you'll be able to find the different facilities that are available to you depending on which campus you may attend. Next is mental and emotional well-being, which are critical to a student's success. When a student's mental and emotional health are suffering unchecked, we may begin to see other areas of well-being affected, such as disrupted sleep patterns, social withdrawal, and difficulty focusing. Regardless if the onset of these mental or emotional issues was due to an environmental factor, or was an internal precipitant, or a combination of even both, students need and deserve access to treatment options. Nationally, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It is available in both English and Spanish. Individuals need only to call 988 or text TALK to 741-741. For non-crisis situations, the National Alliance on Mental Illness offers programming that is dedicated to building the lives for millions of Americans affected by mental illness to be better and to help them be more happy and more successful. As for the state of Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania government site for mental health resources lists where you can find help by topic and get treatment. As for Penn State students, CAPS offers a wide range of services for undergraduate and graduate students, including wellness and self-help options, group, individual, and couples counseling, crisis intervention, psychiatric services, and virtual services. Last, we'll discuss social well-being. Traditional college students experience growth across multiple stages of Erik Erikson's 8 stages of psychosocial development. Their identities continue to emerge and they begin to develop long-term connections with individuals outside of their immediate families. Students need to have safe and healthy opportunities to explore these areas of development in order to find community and belonging. From a national and state perspective on resources, students can volunteer with philanthropic and community organizations, such as Kiwanis and Rotary Clubs, or a branch of an organization that's in their area that they share a personal interest with, such as the ASPCA or Humane Societies if an individual loves animals, or if an individual loves plants, the American Horticultural Society or the Garden Club of America. Those are just a couple of examples. At Penn State, student organizations reach far and wide, both at University Park as well as the Commonwealth campuses. You should go to the Student Affairs website to see all the different organizations and get involved. To summarize, student well-being is important to consider and promote in all areas. Decline in one area of health often affects an individual's overall performance, success, and life satisfaction. By increasing student support, education, and access to resources, we can help students not just survive, but thrive. Thanks for listening.
And a thank you to Amanda for providing us with that. Amanda, again, is somebody that I've worked with quite a bit. So if you're in the Penn State community, I no longer am. I'm over here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. But if you have a chance to meet with her and talk with her, I definitely recommend it. And so as she said, really, it's hard for students to worry about anything else, you know, that quiz, that roommate issue, that anything, if their most basic needs are not being met, if they are hungry, if they are in need of clothing or toiletries, counseling care, anything like that. And some of this presentation so far has talked about our money adjacent resources, right? But now let's really get into some of those non-monetary resources. Non-monetary resources, as Amanda kind of touched on, are really found at 3 levels. These levels are not better, worse, anything than the others. But one thing you want to keep in mind is the further up you go, the more people are in the pool with you. So there may be more resources at a national level, but there are more people competing for those resources. Doesn't mean that they are not available, just means there's a higher level of competition. So schools can help in ways that we discussed already. We talked about institutional aid that may be unlocked either through the CSS profile or the FAFSA, or just by way of applying to a school. Sometimes schools will also offer free or low-cost counseling care or health care. Penn State, for example, has CAPS, which is the Counseling and Psychological Services, which offers a certain number of free counseling sessions before then directing a student back out into the community for low-cost counseling to continue. So most of these resources are under that same umbrella, right? The no cost to low cost, and that's kind of the sweet spot we want to be in. So in addition to the institutional aid, the counseling and health services, there is also typically housing services available through a school. When we're talking about somebody needing housing, we want to think both in the long term and in the short term as well. Where that person may be staying tonight may not be where they are staying long term. That ends up putting them in a better place for their education, for their physical safety, what have you. One thing I want to mention, I'm going to check on there we go. One thing I want to mention with short-term housing, sometimes schools have spaces similar to the supplemental housing situation you may have seen, where a student can say, I've got nowhere to go, I need somewhere to stay. Some schools have that, some schools don't. That really depends on your institution. However, if you're somebody who you're not sure where you're staying tonight, or your housing is not secured, so perhaps you're staying with your best friend tonight, next week you're staying with your cousin. For the purposes of financial aid, so FAFSA, CSS profile, you may qualify as what the government refers to as a homeless student, meaning you may have some additional rights and accesses to look at. So I'm just mentioning that because, again, I said if you might have stuff you didn't report on the FAFSA or CSS profile and you want to make the school aware, if your housing is not secured, that is something to let your school know. They might be able to help you monetarily or by providing short-term housing. If we kind of go up a step in this 3-rung ladder here, local assistance might be where you want to look for more long-term housing. So perhaps if we're talking about local rental assistance or housing assistance, free housing, shelter care, things like that are typically run as community organizations. A lot of times schools are really intertwined in the communities they serve. An example I'll give is Temple University. I graduated from Penn State, but I actually started my academic career at Temple. And they are a wonderful school for resources within the community because a lot of their students live and work in the city in which Temple is located in Philadelphia. So just as an example, some schools will also offer some communities will offer food banks and clothing banks that are run either through the school in conjunction with the school or maybe just advertised through the school. I'll use Penn State as an example. They have a sort of a professional closet that's run where students can go in, and I donated a lot of old suits that didn't fit me anymore. You can donate professional clothing and students can go in if they're looking for clothing for an interview or for one of the career days on campus. access and find professional wear at little to no cost. A lot of community groups have that. A lot of schools have something similar to that, or they may have your standard food bank run through the community. And then nationally, of course, we have some resources that are typically the ones you find online, right? Some of these may be ones you've heard of before. Of course, you've heard of TRIO. Of course, you've heard of some nonprofits like ASAOE. But you may have heard of the National Addiction Counseling. Of course, you heard of College Board because I spent a good amount of time talking about it. These are some national resources that folks from any state can access for scholarship funding, links to care in their community, or what have you. One thing I want to highlight there especially is the addiction care at a national level. Things like Alcoholics Anonymous or some of the other resources that are available for addiction care will have a national line, email, what have you, that you can call and say, I have a student in this location. And they'll say, okay, our representative in that area is Julie. Here is her number. You can give her a call. Truthfully, again, if you were part of our addiction program, I have my own history with addiction. That is how I found a counselor in my area. I went through the national search through Alcoholics Anonymous and found somebody in my area. So believe you me, it works. Speaking of things that work, TRIO works. Absolutely. Love that. All righty. And again, just kind of more of a breakdown of these different areas of resources. I want to drum home, one is not inherently better than the other, but we're offering different things. The school can offer things that might be more short-term, more of a band-aid. That doesn't mean they're not helpful. It doesn't mean that those few free counseling sessions aren't helpful. That free night of staying somewhere or that free meal is not helpful, but it's a short-term fix. The student will need help long-term. So then maybe locally there are programs and other groups that can assist the student. And then of course, nationally, there are the nonprofits we talked about, student advocacy groups, addiction and health groups, and food groups. And there's one that I'll highlight in a moment that I think is the coolest thing ever, that operate on the national level. So let's look at some of these actual shareable resources. So if a student comes to me, if I'm talking about working from my own resource bank, which is, often what I'm doing, these are some of the resources that I've had on hand for a good amount of time. The first four are tried and true. I've directed people, both students and adults, to some of these resources, and especially SAMHSA. It is pronounced SAMHSA, I believe, but the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Association, the 800-662 number, they are a great place to call and say, I don't know where to start. I have someone who needs assistance. I need assistance. Please help. And they're all of these resources have things available to students at free or no cost. So we're not adding that extra burden to the student by saying, oh, we have the resources for you, but you got to pay a couple thousand to get to them. That's what we don't want to do. And in that line of thinking, there are more expensive resources available to students. We're just not going to highlight some of those today because we, again, don't want to focus on having the student spend out more money to access these resources. We want to look at free, available quickly, things that we can put in our bank. Now, the thing I wanted to highlight, and I mentioned this a moment ago, was the thing on the bottom, swipe hunger or swipe out hunger. I have been telling people about this all week because it's one of the neatest things I found recently. So food insecurity is a huge deal for students. So maybe not knowing where the next meal is coming from, or, all right, I'm out of meal points, but I got a month and a half of classes left. This is a problem. Swipe out hunger they can offer assistance in a few different ways, actually, but one of the things they can offer is food vouchers, meal vouchers that you can take to a host of places, so you don't have to worry about necessarily going to the food bank to receive the things you need. In talking with students, there are a lot of students who have said, yeah, I know the food bank is there. I know the stuff is free, but I don't want to walk in there and walk out with a bag. I don't like the way that looks for me. And as much as we want to tell our students, no, that's there for help, Okay, I get that. I hear you. I hear what you're saying. So things like Swipe Hunger offer some other options, some food vouchers, some coupons that folks can go and purchase and not have to worry about that extra level of, I don't want anybody to see me. I could talk about Swipe Out Hunger for hours. I'm not going to. I recommend that you go ahead and check them out. So let's talk for a moment about rental assistance. And this picture that I have here, I grabbed this because we've been focusing pretty heavily on some resources in and around Pennsylvania, which is, I know, where a great number of you are, but also sort of on the East Coast. But let's talk about some other things that are available. Each individual state in the United States is going to have a different pool of funds available, or unfortunately not available, for rental assistance. And some of those funds are earmarked or set aside for college students, for students who are enrolled in higher education. Different programs may have different rules for what enrolled means. So, okay, I'm taking a class. Am I enrolled in higher education? Typically, the rule is, are you enrolled at least half-time? Half-time is 6 credits or more for an undergraduate student. If something says you have to be enrolled full-time, that requires a student to be taking 12 credits or more within a given semester. So just to break that down a little bit. But I use New Mexico here because that's where I am, here in New Mexico. And they have an emergency rental assistance program available. And they have a great breakdown, and I just pulled this from the University of New Mexico's website. But this is a good breakdown of what you want to be looking for when you are directing students to rental assistance. This shows what is available, the funds that are available, and what they can pay for. Of course, if you click for more information, it's going to give you a lot more of the nitty gritty, but it tells you what is available, what has already been awarded, what can be awarded, and where to apply. One of my biggest pet peeves is where I get to a website and it tells me everything about applying, and then there's no apply button. And I'm like, well, where do I go now? I got here. I don't know where I am. So this is an example of a well-written, organized emergency rental assistance listing. Rental assistance can come in a couple different forms. We have rental assistance as in the type I just mentioned, where we are offering either vouchers or paying for rent on behalf of a student, so a student is not paying out. But there are really kind of 3 major areas of rental assistance. The first one I want to mention comes in the form of what we call a landlord letter. And if you are somebody who works with financial aid, or you have dealt with that office at all, you may be familiar with landlord letters. Landlord letters are fun to say, are letters that are issued from the student aid office, typically on university letterhead or with an official signature that says this student has a refund coming. Refunds, if you're unaware, are excess financial aid that's returned to the student so they can pay non-billable costs. Non-billable costs are anything that they need to go to school that doesn't show up on their bill. So for example, off-campus rent is a non-billable cost. The university may not know what you are paying for off-campus rent, but you can still use aid toward off-campus rent. Let's say that your aid is coming in late, or that you were awarded late, and your landlord is threatening legal action. They're threatening eviction if you don't pay. The landlord letter says this student has X amount of dollars coming to them from the federal government that can be used to pay your debt. Please accept this letter as a stay so that you do not apply any sort of eviction proceedings or any kind of penalties to the student. So the landlord letter says, we know you don't have your money yet from the student. We can vouch for the student that money is coming. Landlord letters do not have to be accepted by private landlords or private rental agencies. Again, we say landlord letter. That is the term used at the federal level. So if we would prefer to say rental agency letter, that might be a little bit more of an inclusive term. But with these rental agency letters, these agencies or these people in charge do not have to accept it. They can look at it and say, okay, it says you have 10 grand coming. I don't care. I'm kicking you out. But realistically, the amount of work that a rental agency or a property owner has to do to begin eviction proceedings, to remove a tenant from their housing, to take them to court, is a royal pain. They don't want to do that. So a lot of times just hearing, oh, hey, the money is on its way, is maybe not going to make their day because the money is still late, but it's enough to prevent a landlord from taking action against a student. So that's item one. Item two refers to HUD and housing vouchers. What you may hear referred to at the federal level as Section 8 or housing vouchers. And what that means, if you're unaware, is the government issuing vouchers based on the fair market rate of rent for wherever you are in the country. And pardon me, providing assistance with your rent so that you are able to live where you are. A lot of folks don't realize this, but HUD, and I'm just going to throw this in the chat. Give me 2 moments, please. Nope, not hug. There you go. That's the website you can go to if you have any questions about applying for this housing or directing a student toward it. This is housing that is available to students. Most students qualify for housing vouchers. The biggest issue is the second point you see here, is that space is often not guaranteed. If you've worked with community groups before that are trying to get folks into housing, one of the issues that can arise is sometimes you have more folks who qualify than you have space with which to house them. And that's often the case for college students. So what may happen is, okay, you will be on a list, something becomes available a year and a half from now. Well, you've graduated or you've left school, you're not around anymore, so it's not applicable. That is not to deter you or your students for applying for these housing vouchers through HUD. Pardon me, I'm losing my voice a little bit. I am somebody who says, even if you think they're going to say no, go ahead and apply. Worst case scenario, they say no. But I want to just sort of set expectations with this specific form of housing assistance, just because there might be some extra hurdles there. And then, of course, as we touched on earlier with that example from New Mexico, most states will have rental assistance programs aimed at assisting students in that state or students from that state who are going elsewhere. Typically, the rule is supposed to be that if you apply for housing through, oops, there we are. If you apply for housing through state-based rental assistance, it's supposed to take no more than 14 to 16 business days for you to be placed. So that's a lot shorter than if we're applying for some of the Section 8 listed housing. And again, I'm going to use the terms housing voucher and things like that. You may see Section 8 used more prevalently right now. So just why we have it titled as such. But with state-based rental assistance, typically each state controls their own pools of funds, and they're looking at, similar to the Section 8 housing, they're looking at what are the fair market rates for the area, where can we place this student, and what are their needs. All of this is example of long-term housing assistance. So we talked a moment ago about short-term, long-term. If a student is saying, I need somewhere to stay tonight, that's not necessarily what we're talking about with rental assistance. That is more, I need help paying my rent. I need help keeping the place that I have secured. I need help funding a place and guidance to secure one. So that is something that is available to students that is highly needed. And I can tell you, especially for folks who are working and living in the State College area, as someone who lived in an apartment with students, students are living multiple to a single student apartment because that's the way rent is right now. So there's definitely a large amount of need for our students, for sure. All right, so that is sort of a general overview of what is available to students and how we can kind of build that resource bank. The guide that you have, I threw that in the chat, and I believe Melissa also threw that in the chat. Thank you so much for doing that. Is going to have sort of 5 different areas for you to choose from. I'd recommend that from those areas, from things like food, clothing, short-term housing, rental assistance, all those good things, pick at least one resource. So maybe you choose something at the national level. Maybe there's something locally at your level or at your school that I've not mentioned that would be a good resource to share. Pick one from each category, put it in a folder, put it in a website, a hub, however you and your students meet, so that it's all there. It's there for anyone to look at any time. So let's talk, and we can also unmute. You can talk in the chat, however you would prefer to do that. Let's talk about some resources that work, some that don't, and feel free to say, hey, I've used some of the things you mentioned and I really like them, or I don't like them so much. I want to know that because we want to help our students out, right? So what has been most beneficial to you, your students? What doesn't work so great? All right, I see Karen saying the United Way websites have got a lot of hotlines. Wonderful. United Way, of course, very active in the Penn State community. Leslie mentions local chapters for community scholarships like AAUW, Rotary, absolutely, Live Your Dreams, and a couple others. Yes, love local scholarship providers. Swipe Hunger, we mentioned that one. You know I love Swipe Hunger. So cool. I was sending it to my husband. I was sending the swipehunger.org text. I sent it to the ASAOE group and to my husband. He's like, this is so cool, but I gave him no context for it. So, okay, Catholic Charities, Salvation Army. There's another one listed. Take a sip of water here. Another one I want to mention, DES, DHS. Second Harvest Food Bank, fantastic. Another one I want to highlight is Facebook Buy Nothing groups. We always want to be careful, and I cannot underscore this enough, with Facebook groups, with social media groups, meeting people off of Craigslist. We have to be very careful with that. However, there are a lot of Facebook groups, Buy Nothing groups, where folks post, I have pots and pans that I'm going to throw out. Does anybody want them for free? I have this, that, and the other. And that's a great way for students to access clothes, toiletries, all these goodies for free. These are fantastic. Okay, this is one that I want to highlight, and thank you very much, Maurice, for mentioning this. We want to rebrand the word food insecurities because some students will not self-identify with that. That is a fantastic point. You know, we don't want students to be thinking, oh, this applies to somebody other than me. My need is not enough. We don't ever want to be in the realm of, my need is not as important as his need, her need, their need. So that's a very good point. Reframing some of our language. And as I mentioned, like I said, I've had students tell me, you know, I don't want to go to the food bank. And as Maurice hinted, that's one of the reasons why. All right, veterans hospitals. This is a fantastic question from Shannon. Do these resources also provide support to students regardless of citizenship status? Some do, some do not. Typically, and again, it's impossible to paint with a broad brush here, but typically nonprofit groups aimed at assisting students are not going to have the citizenship requirement if they are not pulling funds from the federal government, from the Department of Education. So unfortunately, when we talk about things like FAFSA, certain things with HUD, with government housing assistance, may be looking at citizenship. That is unfortunately something they may be quote unquote checking. So if that is a concern, we want to direct our students again more to nonprofits and to some free money aid sources. I know we're talking about non-monetary aid sources, right? But we don't want to forget about some of our scholarships and free money aid sources. And typically institutional scholarships, so scholarships from a university or scholarships from community organizations, also do not have the requirement for citizenship. That's great. All right, Sharon mentions to check out Savannah Dreams Center. Oh, this is so great. Free food. List of these resources. Yeah, and I'll try to get a list of these together. Again, this recording will be available on YouTube, and all of the resources that I have listed are available both in the presentation and in the presentation guide. In the stuff that Amanda included, I will let you know she did send me the file with all of those resources, and for some reason my computer is just saying no thank you to downloading that. So that one's on me and not on Amanda. But if you would like to watch the video again, you can go back, screen grab, and that will be available on YouTube. And again, just to call attention to the chat, we have some conversation about DES, DHS, what they mean, what they stand for, and Carolyn has helped us out by breaking that down. So thank you so much. Career one stop. Okay, that's another good one. Do not feel pressure to answer this. I'm seeing a lot of great resources. Has anyone worked with anything that they had some trouble with or would maybe not direct their students back to, and why? And again, if you don't want to answer that question, or that might be a little loaded, we totally understand. And honestly, I'm not sure I can think of any off the top of my head. Awesome. Thank you so much, Shannon. Shannon put together all of our resources for us in a lovely little list here. That is fantastic. Thank you so much for that. A lot of TRIO programs. Awesome. I will take back something I said. One hurdle I ran into with a student a few years ago. I directed a student to a local to them, so it was outside of the state college area, but in the state of Pennsylvania, to a food bank because they had received some scholarship assistance and some other assistance from us, but we needed to access some immediate assistance with food and with, you know, getting some nutrition in our systems. The issue was this particular food bank online, everything said, yep, we're open, we've got stuff, we're good to go. And then I directed the student there and got a call the next day that said I went and they didn't have anything. They were empty. So we did get the students some food, we got them somewhere else. But just as an example, my personal preference now is to call food banks and speak to a person and say, hey, what do you have in stock? And that way I know if I can direct a student there. And also if we have students or faculty or whomever who wants to donate to these groups, when you're on the phone with them, you can say, hey, what do you have available? Also, is there anything you need right now? Any particular items that are in high demand? So a great way to give back as well. Oh, wonderful. Karen says that their school has a dental clinic and a law clinic. That is fantastic. I know, for example, Penn State has a service through the law school, or I know they used to, I believe this is still housed in the law school, where if a student is renting downtown, they can have someone sit with them and read their lease and explain the legalese of it all so students know what they're signing before they get in trouble. So that's fantastic. That is awesome. And like I said, I knew that one of the greatest things about this event is that I'm going to leave with some more events or some more resources to direct people to, and I have. So that's fantastic. All right, do want to be respectful of our time here, and we are coming up on 11 o'clock. So we will wrap up. And I do want to point out, Christy mentioned a lot of local organizations do free tax services or tax services at a reduced cost for college students. That was actually something that I took advantage of way back in the day when I was a college student doing my taxes. So that's fantastic. If you'd like to reach out to me, please do. I really want to keep talking about student aid. I want to know what we need, and again, what works, what doesn't, and what we can do for the future. If you'd like to link up with me on LinkedIn, my information is right there. And I'd really like to know what else in the financial aid realm you'd like to hear about. Would you like to know more about rental assistance, some of these non-monetary aid sources? Did the mere mention of FAFSA and CSS profiles start a whole list of questions in your brain? We can do a whole lot of different events, and I really want to know what you need and what your students need. So please feel free to reach out to me. Grybowski@asaoe.org is my email. And again, my LinkedIn is right there. In addition, we have some other events coming up. Hold on just a moment. Trying to type and talk was not working for me there. We do have some more events coming up. We have our Conversations in the Workplace series that's continuing, and just a lot of great content in the next few months. So please check that out. Look forward to seeing you at future ASAOE events. And for now, if you want to go ahead and log off, sounds great. If you want to stay and ask some questions, that's cool too. But thank you all for joining, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. It was good information.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. I also very much appreciate everyone's involvement in the chat, both with sharing their resources, with providing me some backup, and answering each other's questions. Fantastic.
Thank you so much, Anne. It was really wonderful.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I was just putting in the chat to Melissa. You both have like the same like dialect when it comes to it's like, wow, I just put onto that because I know how Melissa talks, right? And then I'm like, they speak the same.
I'm taking that as a compliment. I'm not sure if she's still in the room. I'm taking that as a compliment.
I'm here. Hi, Kim. How are you today?
That's awesome.
Well, you have a great rest of your day.